Hey everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have our lovely guests Denzel and Grace, and today we'll be talking about metacognition and NI. NI is the dominant function of INTJs and INFJs, and the auxiliary function of ENFJs and ENTJs. Some YouTubers who have NI in the second or dominant position are Teal Swan, Matthew Hussey, to just give you a feel of people who use introverted intuition. And so we're going to talk a little bit about metacognition. So Denzel, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So I made a video back in 2017. I called it Metacognition. And pretty much what happened was I was in class and I had an ESFJ teacher who was teaching us the concept of metacognition. I had never heard that actual term before, but when she presented it, she defined it as, so meta means beyond, and then cognition means your way of thinking. So metacognition, all being one word, was beyond thinking, which in a way, like, and if you go look at the YouTube video, I drew like a stick-figured man, and then he was thinking X, Y, Z, and then there was a thought bubble coming out of his thought bubble thinking of why was he thinking X, Y, Z. And that's kind of like an image explaining what metacognition is, because it's pretty much retracing your thought process and like going beyond your thinking, like having a meta perspective. Like, all right now I'm thinking about ice cream. Wait, why am I thinking about ice cream? Oh, because I was thinking of, I heard this song, which reminded me of the ice cream truck, which then reminded me of this. And so you start like retracing that thought pattern so often. And that is actually like NI, introverted intuition, has many different facets to it. But I think that that's one of the biggest facets of NI. And the thing that was like interesting, especially in that class, was when she presented that concept, then she asked the class, like, how many of you guys relate to this? And there was only 3 NJs in that class. Coincidentally, it was me and 2 other ENFJ. They didn't know that they were ENFJ, but I knew that they were. I typed them in that sense. And we were the only ones who raised our hands and had things to talk about. And that kind of surprised me too, because, I don't expect like no one to like, even like from watching this video, I expect maybe like some people of different types. I'm like, oh, well, I kind of like relate to metacognition and everything. I think that we potentially all do that to an extent. But the thing that sets it apart with NJs is that this is a like subconscious thing. So that's very important. Like, it's subconscious. We don't just sit back and be like, actively retrace our thought process. This is something that we've always just pretty much done. We've always been detached enough from our thought process to where we're watching our mind form patterns. And so, and it's even interesting, like, again, like people with lower stacked NI, like Jamila, my ISFP wife, so she has it in the tertiary position, not nearly as strong as, an ENFJ, ENTJ, INFJ, INTJ, but there's even like small examples where it's like she was hanging out with an ISTJ and then ENFP. I'm wondering if he's maybe INFP, but yeah, I know that he's NFP. And they were all 3 watching Hulu or something, and a commercial, like an ad, came on for chicken, and then she said that about like maybe a minute or 2 later, it was like a kind of like quick ad that just passed by, and then about a minute or 2 later, the ISTJ was like, I'm kind of in the mood for chicken, and then the NFP was like, yeah, me too, and then she was like, I wonder why that is. Like, they started like thinking about that. And then Jamila pointed out, it's like, oh, because there was just an ad of like, chicken, like about a minute or 2 ago. And they didn't even recall the ad. And the ISTJ is like, no, I'm just in the mood for chicken. I'm just hungry. And of course, you can't really like prove like, no, this is why you are not just hungry, but you specifically want chicken. But it was something that was planted in their mind. And so just to like further throw this like more out there, ever since like I realized this in myself, and I'm not, 100% sure, like if this is like all ENFJ and stuff like that. But I'm like I've always been heavily into the mindset of like seeing everything as seeds including like planting seeds and stuff like that. And I have an INFJ best friend named David, Individual. Some people may know him from my channel and everything, Instagram. He's kind of like Instagram famous now. And he and I used to actually, like, our biggest conflict that we had with each other to this date was the fact that, it's going to sound crazy, but he hated, especially as a self-preservation 5, he hated the idea that I would always plant things in his mind. And he would not notice that I planted these seeds in his head until later when he starts seeing them grow. Sometimes, and again, this is like very abstract language, and I wish I could have like concrete examples to explain, but it'd just be so difficult. But like sometimes he would not know that I planted these seeds until he saw this huge tree in his head, and he's eating from the tree, and he's enjoying the fruit from that tree that I planted in his head, because I never did anything ill-intended, but I did secretly plant things in his head, and he's eating from it and he's enjoying it. But as he's eating it and enjoying it, he's reprimanding me like, yo, what did I tell you about doing that? You know, and he's like very upset about it and everything. And he's like, dude, like, and my whole thing was, typical ENFJ things, like, I just knew that you would like this. I knew that this would help you. I knew that, you know, how this was going to play out. And if I just said it straightforward, I also was pretty confident that you would not know, that you would not trust me. And so honestly, the best way that I could get you to trust me was, ironically, to get you to just do things kind of like me, you know, controlling it in a way, and then seeing that everything's worked out. And once you've seen it happen enough times, later on you realize that I was the man behind, you know, the scene and everything. And of course, you know, I get it. You feel invaded and stuff like that. So in a way, you kind of don't trust me now because I've invaded your mind in that way. But you at least now trust that wow, you know, you're 10 for 10 right now. Like, dang, that was you too? What the heck? Like, you're really good at this. So now, which is our relationship now, I don't plant things in his head anymore. I just directly tell him like, hey, this is what I think, blah, 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 blah. This is how I feel like it's going to play out, yada, yada, yada. You should do this socially, you know, whatever. And he trusts me, as well as Jamila and many other people in my life, because they now have seen me do this enough times. In fact, my other INFJ friend named Justine, she said that we were on a live stream one time, and she said that she's noticed me doing this as well a few times. And she said, yeah, I'd see you like doing that. And I just love it personally, because when I see what sprouts from that, then it's just like, man, this man is like amazing. It's like, wow, you know, that's cool. And usually what I've noticed is that only NI DOMs, sometimes NI auxiliaries, will notice me doing that. This was all developed from that metacognition idea, where it's like, because I've retraced the thought process in my mind several times, then if you have thought B, I've been through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, you know, all of that so frequently that I can jump to P and plant Q or whatever. I could even just suggest this, and then you'd be like, whoa, how did you know that that's where I was going? And before it was like really subconscious, it was like, I don't know how I knew that. But now, because I understand metacognition, it's like, oh, I knew that because I've been through this thought process enough times with enough things. FE NOM, so I've had a lot of people that I've dealt with to be able to go back into my mind and of this really large pool. And so, yeah, it's mind inception, which is also my way of like influencing people. I never really try to force people. I just try to like drop things and like, hey, just consider that, and you know, and yeah. So that was a lot, and I might say more later as we converse, but that's the foundation.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, Denzel. Shannon Welsh actually calls NI thought inception too, so it's very interesting that you guys coincide. NI is very aware of its inner thought life. It's almost aware of the quality of the things that you fill your mind with, and it knows the progression of thoughts. So the seeds of thoughts and the progression it takes to grow into a tree. So it's aware of the trajectory of these general things that you have in your mind that you plant and they grow and they fester. So yeah, Jay Shetty, he calls it, you either plant seeds in your mind or weeds. And you have to be very deliberate and intentional with what you put in your mind, because that sprouts.
Yeah. And I've noticed this too, like with myself, like I've always been very aware of what was being planted in my head. Always. Like I can watch a movie, I can watch a show, I can read a book, I can have conversations. And I guess because I'm so good at planting things in other people's heads, which again, like this is literally people other than David. So even me saying this now, I'm being like vulnerable in a way, like, hey, I'm capable of doing this. It's kind of like, it's a thing that years ago I used to never even like bring up. I'd even play dumb about it because it really like just scared people. Like, how is he so capable? You know, whatever. But like, I guess now that people trust my intent more, like Jamila, for example, she said that like, yeah, I know that you're very capable of doing that. But like, I think the people, she literally said, like, I think the people who don't trust you when you're doing this are just stupid, because whenever you do it, it's like always like really whatever, which, you know, that's her opinion or whatever. But like, she's pretty much saying like, you know, you have good intent and you always do it well. And I won't do it unless if I'm pretty much positive of the outcome or like what tree is going to sprout from that. But anyway, like I'm aware of how it impacts my mind. I can watch something and some people just watch it and be like, wow, that was a great movie, that was a great thing. And they won't even be aware of like the messages that was planted in their head. But for me, I've always been like, wait, they're trying to suggest this, or I see what they're doing. This is the kind of meaning they're trying to put behind this, or I see the subliminal message that they're sending me. And I have guards at the forefront of my mind to like block it or to invite it at times. And this has been like, you know, conversations and like all of that, because now it's like, I have to be aware of like who's planting stuff in my head. And I allow you to plant things in my head if, you know, if I want that fruit there, or if I see that it's going to be beneficial, or if I see that you are skilled enough to know what things should be planted. But if I feel like you're not proficient enough, I'm going to keep you away because I have to guard the garden of my mind too. So yeah, I think that's also like something really interesting that goes, it's all stemmed from this metacognition standpoint, watching your subconscious mind as much as you can.
And because like NI is so aware of the seeds, it knows in the future what those seeds will cause. So it's aware of the result of those messages, the eventualities, or where it will lead. And Grace, you also mentioned this cool idea about NI where it's thought deja vu. So could you go a bit into how NI is thought deja vu?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, like everyone experiences deja vu. Like I've been there before. I've been down this road before is kind of what it feels like to have thought deja vu. And I actually think it is because of NI, because at least when I experienced thought deja vu, and I'm curious who would like relate to that, because I don't think anyone has really ever talked about the idea of thought deja vu. But I've actually never experienced like sensory deja vu, just like the thought deja vu. So I'll kind of like go down a train of thought and I'm like, I have thought this exact pattern before. And I think the only reason that you can do that is like through kind of this underlying awareness of, and it's funny because it's not like this active trying to, you know, Denzel had mentioned before that NI is actually kind of a passive process. It's like a very aware process, but you're also not forcing it. So it's kind of naturally happening, but you are actually aware and kind of observing almost like everything that happens. It doesn't just happen to you, but you also have like a mental reaction to it, and that you kind of see the rippling effects between like, okay, so this happened, and then I got this idea as a result of this thing, but then I used my idea to change the reality, which then did this. And it's kind of watching this kind of pinging back and forth effect between, you know, reality in the way that reality affects perception and back again. So when I've had like thought deja vu, it's tended to be, you know, oh, well this, but then why does that cause this thought? But then why does then then now I think I would believe this. And it kind of just keeps, it's like a train of thought, I would say. Like metacognition, the idea of metacognition that Denzel was talking about is like pretty much the idea of like a train of thought. I think it's almost like, in a way, like zooming out. So SE is pretty much like when you are in the circumstance, like fully immersed in it. So like if you have really high up SE, you're probably going to be very aware of like exactly like just the full impact and force of like right here and now. But then NI is after you've had several events, you're kind of zoomed out and you see like this event happened, then this event, and this event. And you can actually you stop kind of seeing the events themselves, and rather you begin to see just the connection that one event led to the other, and sort of the cause and effect of it, of all things. And so the more zoomed out you are, the less you are immersed in a situation, but the more aware you are of like the cause and effect.
Can you start from cause and effect again? Because your thing went mute during that, so it'll be mute in the recording. So.
Oh, okay. So. Yeah. Oh, dang it. I should be able to retrace my mental process here. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just like the cause and effect of all things that you can kind of see from a detached, zoomed out perspective, kind of like from the third person. I would say you can pretty much see it as a trajectory. So once you see like cause and effect, it begins to like look like if you had a graph, it would look like a line of what would you call that? A line of best fit almost. And so once you see a line of best fit, you can then assume the trajectory that will stay on. So if you can kind of see a pattern, the trajectory, the line that forms, can kind of be extended in your own mind. And so I think that from that point, the reason that NI can be considered like able to tell the future or able to see possible outcomes, it's not because of some sort of psychic ability or anything like that. It's just you kind of almost assume what the future will be because the clear line of what everything has already meant and the way that cause and effect works is so clear that you basically take for granted that cause and effect pattern will continue into the future. And you can pretty much bank on certain things in the future just because you're so aware of the past. And Denzel, you actually talk about in some of your videos the idea of running simulations. And you're like, well, if this happens, therefore this. Well, what if I did it a little bit differently? And it's kind of like you take the SE components of like present given reality, like given this scenario, therefore the play out of the scenario will be this. And it's almost like it's kind of like making an assumption. I mean, it just feels like, oh, duh. Yeah, of course, Is there anything else that you wanted to say, Denzel, on running simulations? Because that's an idea that you talk a lot about.
Yeah, simulations, all of this just bleeds together. I've run simulations almost all the time, like even small things like, well, not small, but like, things like this, like where it's like, okay, I wonder how this is going to go. All right, if I started off just spieling about, what metacognition is, then it's probably going to prime these thoughts, which will then allow, Joyce to be a little bit more relaxed about how the conversation is going to go. And then it's just going to flow in this way. And, like, it's literally just like always going that way. It's like, but if I just allow it to go this way, if I just do this instead, it's almost like I described it one time in a few videos. I said that, at least in my experience, ENJs are really skilled because of the NI-SE being so close together. From my experience, INJs are better skilled at seeing what's going to come, like, in the future. And then ENJs are better skilled at making it happen, like making what's going to happen in the future happen. So like, I almost think of like Bran from from Game of Thrones, where I believe that he was an INFJ. And he was always capable of like seeing like what was going to happen. And he just kind of like positioned himself to where like things could like kind of like fall in his lap because he saw the trajectory. While ENJs, I think of like ENFJ Raymond Reddington from The Blacklist. He's one of my favorite ENFJ fictional characters. And as you watch this man operate, it's incredible. He's a genius. He's played by James Spader, and like he literally, like pretty much long story short, the plot of the story is this man has been on the run for over 30 years. He's been on the most wanted list, top 10 most wanted list and everything. And the police, the FBI, they could not get him. Finally, in the first episode, he turns himself in randomly. They don't really know who he is because, you know, they're still kind of like, you know, like not identifying like his like how he looks like. So he's like, so he walks into the, you know, DC or whatever, and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for Harold Cooper, which is like, you know, the FBI deputy or whatever. And then they're like, okay, just tell him that Raymond Reddington's here. So then the woman's like, all right. He walks to the middle and he just starts taking off of his suit and everything, and everyone's looking at him like, what? Then when she types in his name, she realizes like, wait a minute, he's on the most wanted list. So immediately, perfect timing, like he's already like on his knees, everything's arrested. Fast forward, he takes over the police department. Like they're now working for him. They're helping him build a criminal empire as he's kind of like snitching on others. And the criminals, they think that he's on their side still. So he's going up to them and he's like, oh, good to see you. And he's like going all kind and everything like that. And they still think that he's like a criminal, which he is. But then he's actually working for the FBI, which is also working for him. And long story short, again, almost every episode, the FBI is upset with him because they didn't see how many seeds he planted. Like he was able to predict so many things that were going to happen because he caused a lot of those things to happen. Like he's like, well, you know, like in about 2 weeks, this is going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And I think that this is going to happen and yada, yada, yada. And then he knows also that from telling them this information, this is how you guys are probably going to respond to this information because Harold, you're so predictable. He's an ENFJ. And so he literally like says that like, oh, you know, like Harold is nothing but predictable. So if I tell him this information, he's probably going to be the good guy to do this, which maybe then I should probably do this. And so I should set this up. And before you know it, they're like, oh my gosh, you tricked me and everything. He's like, but then F.E. Dom, he's like, I don't know why you're so upset. You got your guy. I got what I did. It's a win-win situation. And it's like, wow. So all of that, again, to like say that I feel like that's what I mean by like running simulations. Like, okay, when I say this, if I present this information, if I do this, if I do that, how are people going to respond to this? Which is that FE, that FE-NI combo, and sharpening that a lot. And then from being able to accurately predict how a group of people or an individual is going to respond to certain information, then I can then think further, like, okay, then how do I respond to that? And then what should I do over here? What should I place in this section just in case they go this way? Because I feel like they're going to go this way. And so I have to have cushion over here. And then when it all plays out, I just kind of am like, oh, wow, you know, this is kind of surprising. I'm really playing my hand here and like, but, or showing my hand here. But yeah, again, for like educational purposes, like this is how it's always been in my mind. And when I first got into type, they labeled the ENFJ as like 16 personalities. They were like people mastery. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, well, I can see how that'd be. But of course, like at the end of the day, my intentions, I can always guarantee are always pure. Like I don't use this superpower to harm people. Yeah. And I think that that's like the biggest thing to like know, because then you'll see ENJs who are capable of like, you know, doing this or whatever. And then you're like paranoid, like, what is he planting in my head? Where is she? And it's like, first of all, it's not every single moment of the day that I'm thinking, oh, you know, what could I plant in someone's head or anything like that. But even if I was, it's for the good of humanity, or at least, you know, how I see it. And from that subjective perspective of how that person would be like. Would this person like the result of this? Not just would I like it, but would this person also like it? And if that's the case, then it's like, all right, let me gift this to them.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, like with FE and NI, it's almost like mastering people systems. So people are the system, and you're seeing all the nodes and how this one causes that one. But it's almost like FE wants to gauge the emotional temperature of all these people. And through gauging the emotional temperature, they want to make sure like no one is upset, like unnecessarily upset. And it sees it as like, if I just understand this better, I can like kind of master how I respond or cause a better effects to compound.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. That's exactly like how it is. The last thing I ever want to do is to have either a person or a group of people. Like if David, how I spoke about planting a tree in his mind and stuff, if I did not witness him eating from those trees so often and actually enjoying it and admitting that he's enjoying it, he's like, this is really good fruit, you know, you did it again. Like, but I'm just upset. Like, why didn't you tell me that you're planting this or, you know, whatever. That's what he had the problem with. He had no problem with what I actually planted. And, but if he did have a problem with what I actually planted, like, you thought this was best for me, but it wasn't. And this is actually, I'm allergic to this, you know, then I'd be like, dang, like that, I should not be doing this kind of thing. And so before I even operate in such ways, I make sure, like, again, future projection, like, would this end well? Would this person, would this individual, would this group of people benefit from what I'm giving them? And I think that's really like where me as an FE Dom, like that comes into play, because I'm watching like what will actually benefit the people versus what I think would be self-serving in some way. In fact, a lot of times I get the short end of the stick.
When you say like, would this end well, it resonates a lot with me, because I ask myself a lot, like at the end of the day, would I be happy with this result? Or at the end of my lifetime, before this is all over, is this okay? Like leaving off on this note? I don't know. It's kind of morbid, but I almost project very far ahead. It's kind of like I'm so zoomed out. My automatic response is to jump there. So your friend David on Denzel's channel, which you should all check out, by the way, he's linked below, and Grace is also linked below. And so with David, he talks about how he plans for lifetimes. So he's kind of seeing how his action will play out way beyond his life. Like, what is the legacy that will leave behind from his actions? So yeah, back on the topic of metacognition, NI is thinking about your thoughts. So it's thinking about thinking. It's almost like retracing back why you think the way you think in order to understand it more. And metacognition is almost this process of zooming out and viewing your own thinking from a bird's eye view. It's like seeing everything from a cliff's edge. It's like this space between you and that idea, so you can get that idea more pinpointed and on point. And so I kind of see NI as a shattered mirror. NI is like a shattered part of a mirror, but it knows to understand the full perspective, you have to take all these shattered parts of the mirror and to put them together, because that's when you synthesize a conclusion. You synthesize a conclusion that will piece together the entirety of the mirror, and then you'll understand, you'll see yourself through it, and you're like, wow, a part of it that was right, you had a part, and now that we connect these in a synergistic way, it all makes sense. And so it's taking all of these fragments and creating a singularity with it, like a shattered mirror and turning into a whole one.
That is actually beautiful, because David has a drawing of exactly that, and he posted it a couple of years ago of like this man, and he had like a shard over his head, over his eyes, and it was like a shattered mirror type of thing. And he said that this is how he views like an eye, like in a certain way. And for me, I've always resonated with a similar analogy. Have y'all ever heard of the story of like the elephant and the blind men?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for those who may be watching don't know, essentially, I see NI as, all right, so there's an elephant and there's 5 blind men. And, you know, one blind man is like feeling on the tail, another blind man is like feeling on the trunk, another blind man is feeling on the ears, you know, whatever. And they're just like, you know, they're not communicating with each other. They are simply like feeling. So I guess if anything, that could be like the SE in a way, like you're gathering all the information. And so me as an ENFJ, like when I'm coaching people, then I tell ENFJs, like, you're out all day feeling on the elephant, but your NI does not begin to make the connections. Your blind men do not communicate until you go into tranquility, until you go into solitude, because NI needs like, you know, sensory deprivation and everything. So until you go into your prayer, you know, closet, or until you like go into meditation, or until you like, you know, just allowing yourself to wander through the garden of your mind, you're always out and about, like feeling on the elephant, feeling on different animals and everything, and you're gathering all of this information about people, but you're not making the connections. Your blind men are just feeling all the things, and they're not communicating with each other. But then the longer that you spend in solitude, then the longer the blind men start to say, hey, you know, so over here I have I think this is a tail. Like, wait, you know, over here I feel a trunk. Oh, I'm feeling you know, an ear. I think this might be an elephant. Boom, and epiphany. And then so for INJs, when I'm coaching them, I tell them that they have the opposite problem. They've been, you know, having their blind men, you know, talk so much about that one elephant that they've been feeling, but they haven't explored other animals. So they just, you know, go through the same pattern over and over and over again, the same patterns over and over and over again, but they have not, like, you know, explored like more people. They have not engaged with more people to be able to have their blind men feeling like other projects. Their blind men just keep on communicating with each other about this same elephant. It's like, all right, we know this is an elephant now. We need to gather more information about a different animal, but you know, what I mean? And so for ENJs, it's like slow down, spend more time in solitude, allow all of that information that you've collected when you've interacted with other people to now connect, and have the epiphanies bubble up. And then for INJs, it's, hey, I know that you're introverted, but actually go out there, start communicating with people, engage that SE function so that you can allow your NI to actually, like, you know, when you do go back into solitude, then your NI-SE has like more on both sides to actually, you know, engage in. So we learn a lot from each other, like, because the INJs usually have more of the patterns in that sense, but they only have like, maybe like, in my opinion, like a few, because that they've just really highly developed. And then the ENJs, like, they might not even have like as many either, because they haven't spent so much time, or they have like a lot of like maybe like small ones, but they haven't spent enough time like deepening them because they've just gathered a whole bunch of information. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Exactly. Yes, Grace. I just like to add a little bit of a thought onto yours, Denzel. And so basically you mentioned how NI works well with sensory deprivation. And I feel like the reason for that is it needs an uninterrupted form of thought. I think it all boils down to NI needs to be not interrupted, because it's looking for a cohesive way to put thoughts together. So if you'd interrupt it, then now it was understanding the ripple effect, and now you stopped it in the middle of one of its ripple effects, and it's like, oh wait, where was I again? Now I have to retrace everything to get back to that thought, and then to go off of that.
Grace. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just what happened to Grace like just a few minutes ago, like when she was like interrupted and she's like, oh wait, where was I? And then we had to like, yeah. So yeah, I fully agree with that. That's exactly why I believe that NI needs like sensory deprivation, because the moment that you get back into like something that's like just really distracting from the external world, those blind men can no longer communicate. They're just back to absorbing, like, you know, like gathering information again, which I know that NI is also like an information gathering process, but like for the sake of analogy, I'd say like the SE is the more of the information gathering in this sense, where it's like it's feeling on the elephant or it's feeling on whatever it is. The NI is like making sense of the SE. That's when they start communicating. And so you can't be both feeling and then communicating. Or the analogy has a little bit of flaw, but like you guys do it.
So that's actually very interesting about that tension between SE and NI, because that really made me think of how that actually differs. So NI needs to completely like tune out of anything and everything around it to sort of tunnel vision into the NI perception. Whereas SE doesn't need to. And SI has a weird thing where it tunnels into the actual details. And so I thought it might be interesting to sort of bring up the way that I don't know if this happens to other E and Js, but for me, I actually have less of attention with, I do have attention with SE interrupted me, oh no. But actually what happens more often than that is I create a lack of SE input without even trying to, where I will like go into the thought zone, and sometimes it's like inappropriate situations to do so. Like in the car, like you don't want it to happen like in the car and not be noticing a bunch of things, but here's a kind of interesting, just like totally mundane example. But I was walking with my ESFJ friend like a year ago, and we were out near the school, and there was a girl studying outside on the grass on a blanket, and there was somebody else like reading in a hammock, and we were walking by, and so my friend and I just sat on a bench. And I was like, out of curiosity, as we were walking over here, like what are the thoughts that like go through your mind? Like I'm just so curious, because I don't want to like make assumptions, because this was when I was really getting into like how does SI like come into somebody's perception. And she was like, oh, I noticed it was this color blanket, and she was wearing these shoes, and the book was this color. It was this book. The blanket was hanging just so, the hammock was hanging just so. It was this bird over here. And I'm like, wait, how did you notice that? I had no idea, because what happened was I walked in, I saw that there was a girl studying on a blanket, and immediately I stopped noticing anything else, because my brain was just like, I wonder, why is she studying on a blanket? Like, what about the outside environment helps her to study? Because most people would feel distracted to study outside. So I wonder, does this somehow invigorate her? Does this get her into the zone? I wonder, like, it would be so cool to talk to her and understand what motivates her, because she's like a different type of person than other people that I've met. And like, I would just love to know what goes on in her mind, but the entire time I was thinking that, I didn't notice that someone was reading a book in the hammock, or like I noticed it in the back of my mind, but I was completely oblivious to what book it was, what color it was. Like I only took in like the bare minimum of information. And I've actually gotten the feedback in my life that I've always zone out. Like as a kid, it was even worse of a problem. I wouldn't know when my class was lining up behind me for recess, because I was tracing things in my own mind so much, and it honestly became a problem. I was just almost like, I know a lot of any users describe being in La La Land to the exclusion of like a SE blind spot, but honestly, when you have like ENJs also have a sensory blind spot to SI, meaning like you completely like cut off any details from entering your mind, because a detail is a deep focus on like the sensory world, the physical world. And you cannot simultaneously zoom into sensory facts while also zooming into the perceptions inside of your mind, because those are kind of opposites. And that also brings me to talk about something else I've really been thinking about. The way that SI can really grip a person in their core versus how NI can grip a person in their core. And I just graduated with a degree in psychology, so I've been studying like a lot of really cool psychology stuff this year. Like the final classes and stuff, and really hearing about the theories of different psychologists. So, one of them obviously is Freud's. I feel like most people are aware of like Freud's thing, and he would like really go into people's past and be like, how did that event affect you? Like, how does the symbolism of that really get to your core? Like that event shaped you and you cannot outrun it. And sort of just reconciling with the fact that an event happened to them and it shaped them for life. But what was very interesting was this guy, Adler, was another psychologist. And I think Adler was ENFJ, actually. Yeah, Denzel knows. And this guy, I was just reading about him. I'm like, man, this is like 100% like NFJ philosophy here. This guy, he grew up knowing that he had like issue, like he had some tension with his brother, he had some relational conflicts growing up, and so he grew up thinking like, I really want to help like those kind of situations that were rough in my family to not happen later. And he really wanted to he saw like in his mind how his, not necessarily the physical events that happened in his life, but the events that happened, the way that it shaped his own perception of the world. That's what he really got at. And he's like, if I realize that sibling relationships affect my perception of the world, how true is that? And then also, how can I like check that? And so his philosophy, he had first trained under Freud, and then he completely broke away of Freud because he disagreed with his philosophy. And he was like, Freud is so caught up in what happened to you. But he's like, I think what needs to happen is we need to break people away from being gripped by the events that happened to them. We instead need to make people challenge the beliefs that they had. And he called them mistakes. He said, you know, we need to teach children to not like form, like not to be influenced by people who make them form beliefs in their mind that hurt their narrative in life. And a lot of times, like, basically his emphasis was children are taught things that make them believe that they are not socially acceptable, and it hinders our social utility to each other. And if you can correct a mistake and make somebody stop having faulty thinking about their relational impact, if you can get them to shift their like entire paradigm of what it means to relate to somebody else, like have them look back on a memory and what did that memory do to your perception? And then question if that's actually true. And if that were not true, if you can shift your entire paradigm, your entire life here on out changes, your purpose changes, everything changes. So if you can like get a child to have different thoughts planted in their mind, that instead of like false belief thoughts, like if you can get truer thoughts planted in your mind, you can change society. So that was kind of his entire philosophy. And I think that is very NI because like NI users can also be just as gripped by their like past or reliving the past, but it's less the physical like immersion in reliving something and more like, whoa, that was significant. That was like a turning point in my life. But you know, like questioning the turning point and seeing how to like shift your model is a big thing. And I think that really connects to what Denzel was saying about planting seeds. You know, something that I really relate to is like, you know, watching dynamics of a group or a family and being like, you guys like are so caught up in your own perspective that if you were able to see, like, it wouldn't take much. If you were just able to have your mind open to like the possibility that somebody else sees something else, like almost that if you open up an NI possibility, people will continue to see it. Like, because NI is kind of the idea that if you focus on an aspect of reality, it will keep being revealed and that focus will keep amplifying kind of. And so if you can get somebody who previously was unaware and unopen to an aspect of reality and open their mind to that aspect, you can basically get them to see a similar picture to what you see. And if people can all like see each other's perspectives, then you can actually like that resolves so much of like issues in families and friendships. And to me, like that is the biggest thing I've found with like planting seeds is just, you know, what if that person didn't mean what you thought they meant? What if they weren't malicious? What if this was going through their mind? Like if you thought that it was possible for them, you're like, whoa, wait, really? No, they could. And then, you know, and also people don't like it. That's when people are like, hey, you had a point there. I saw you had a point. Like that person really did mean that. I didn't want to see it, but I did. Why did you plant that seed? So there is kind of that resistance too, but usually in the end, people realize that being open to that perspective because the seed was planted was usually beneficial to them because I mean, I really can't see how it's harmful the way if you're doing it so that people understand each other better. But anyway, I've rambled on long enough. What do you guys think?
That was so beautiful. Like seriously, like that made me be like, yes, like somebody gets it. Because that's literally it. Like I put out all of these disclaimers like earlier in the video, like, oh man, I'm like self-incriminating, and guys, my intentions. That's literally everything. Like, we're like the same person. Like, that's literally how I think. And it's so interesting, like how, you know, you can apply that, like from being aware of like how seeds are planted and everything. Even things like I watch so many documentaries on serial killers and stuff like that, and so many people have like looked at me like, that's weird. Like, why are you so fascinated with Jim Jones? Why are you so fascinated with Jeffrey Dahmer? Why are you so fascinated with Ted Bundy and stuff like that? And I was fascinated because I wanted to see how they became the people that they were. I've had people be like, oh, that's easy. Demonic activity. It's like, okay, well, that could or could not be true, you know, sure. You know, but I feel like there's also like more there, you know, there's also like a psychological aspect, you know, there could be a spiritual aspect as well, you know, stuff like that. And for me, I remember like watching Jeffrey Dahmer's, and like watching what he said at the end, like toward like near the end of his life, like when he was convicted and stuff. And he talked about how as a child, you know, like his father, like took him out fishing, and he was like fascinated about like gutting the fish and stuff like that. And a lot of things like, oh, I just wanted to like make my father proud, but he never really like paid much attention to me and kind of thing. Like, and to the point where now that he's being arrested, I believe that his father was actually there to like overhear all of this. And his father like finally began to apologize. And I was just thinking like, man, if you freaking just noticed this years ago, you could have saved this guy from killing people. Like, because well, again, this could be like self-incriminating, but it's like, dang, Jeffrey Dahmer had the opportunity to be actually just a normal, good person, you know, and all he needed was this, but because he wasn't getting this, then these seeds were planted in his head. It allowed other things to like now be planted. And then, you know, people are very heavily influenced by like porn and stuff like that. So like a lot of these, you know, serial killers that did watch porn and everything. And of course, you know, I'm not gonna like talk too much about this. You know, I don't know, like, you know, Joyce's channel and everything, but like a lot of people watch that. And especially like in the Christian circle, like they'll go to the extreme saying like any type of thing, you know, like this is like, it's going to turn you into a rapist, like a very like slippery slope kind of thing. And it's like, there's some truth to that, but like it's more of like the people who are like progressing and like from going from just like the regular stuff to like now like, oh, you know, I want to watch videos of someone getting beaten senseless kind of thing. And those are seeds being planted in your mind. Then now you eventually start to act out. And so again, like I'd watch these things and I'm like, if we were aware of the seeds that are being planted in our own minds, aware of the seeds that are being planted in other people's minds, and we're actually able to like come outside of ourselves and see how our society, the seeds that are planted in our society that we are all being influenced by, if we could become aware of those things and not only become aware of them, but like yank out the weeds, agree on which seeds should be planted, and then have those like sprout, and then we all feed from those trees, we'll all be great, you know? Like, but that's really difficult to do because, you know, there's just, it's such an abstract realm kind of like, you know, again, like a lot of people, they just easily say like, why are you even trying to understand these people? Now, granted, there are just evil, bad people too, you know, that just, it's like, no, I just did it because it was fun, you know, but then there also could be like seeds planted there as well. You know, like you just have to like dig a little bit deeper. And so, Grace, that was like really beautiful. Like I related to everything that you were saying.
Yeah, I related. Yeah, I related to everything you said too, Grace and Denzel. So I find that with people, when Denzel references the seeds, what I see is like people's interpretations in their minds of an event. So it's kind of like, you know, neuro-linguistic programming. I think that it's very NI in the sense that NLP is all about understanding your interpretation of an event so that you can change that to become more on a better track. So it's almost like it's not really the thing that happened to you, but it's more about how your brain processes that event. And NLP is all about taking that and then changing how you interpret events, because the interpretations in your mind set a trajectory for the quality of life you have. And that everything is like connected in this weird ripple effect way that NI kind of sees. NI is kind of like, you know, a reverse ripple effect, as Nate Russa puts it. It's like you see this drop of water dropping down, and the NI is trying to retrace it and going up. So it's like, why did that water drop from up there? And NI is going that process, retracing it and understanding it at its root, at its seed, at its origin. So yeah, and Grace, you also mentioned this cool idea about a Pandora's box and NI, and I wondered if you could go into that.
Yeah. So actually, that is something that I didn't really come up with that, but I watched Megan's video explaining how she, as an ENFJ, developed NI, and she said that at the point where it kind of like hit her, she kind of hit this just like cascade of NI at a certain point, and she said that she noticed a bunch of questions in her mind, in that it was almost like she called it Pandora's box, that once she was curious, like she couldn't get that curiosity out of her head, and she kept like pursuing that answer like to the ends of the earth. And I really related to that. And I think that that's definitely a feature of NI. I mean, especially in ENJs, because I think INJs might have a little bit more of a calmness and natural, or maybe Denzel also relates to that kind of calm realization, but maybe certain people with like less baseline NI, I don't know, can feel like almost an urgency to it. And I definitely relate to once you like have a question. So like for me, one of these things would be as a kid, I knew okay, like I also am a Christian, and so but there were certain things about Christianity that, even though I like believed in Jesus, I did not fully understand as a kid. And so many people expected that I should just trust it without knowing why. And I was very like frustrated and aggravated, because I was like, I need to know this now. Now that I don't understand, I can't rest until this understanding has been reached. So like when I was, I don't know, maybe like 8, I was in a class and somebody was like, yeah, Jesus had to die on the cross to save us from our sins. It's like, yeah, I get that, but why couldn't God have just...
Denzel, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to say?
I think another last thing was I have a video on my channel called Chasing Buses, where essentially what happened was, I'll try and make it really short. I actually have 2 videos. One of them was me just presenting the idea, the thought, the concept, and the other one was me presenting it in class because of I think it was my motivational speaking class, and I decided to use that. But I think it was a very NI moment for me, because what happened was I came out of my building. I was in New York, and I saw the bus at the first bus stop, and I was like, oh shoot. So I knew I wasn't going to catch it over there. So instead I started running to the next bus stop. I tried to catch it over there instead. As I started running, oh great, Grace is back. But and then we're wrapping up. But yeah, so I was chasing the bus to try to catch it to the second stop. And as I'm running to catch the bus, my mind starts telling me you're tired. You're not going to do this. You can't make it. And I start believing it, yeah, I am tired. I'm not going to catch this bus. I'm not going to catch this bus. But while I'm having that dialogue with my mind, my body is still going. And then it's dude, why are you still going? You're killing yourself. You can't make it. You're not going to make it. Stop. And then I was like, yeah, I really am tired. I need to stop. I'm not going to make it. And yet still, as I'm talking with my mind, then I'm still running. My body's not listening, because I'm having too much time actually talking with my mind and then actually making my body stop. This continued up until the point where I finally reached the bus. I made it to the bus stop. And when I hopped on the bus and I sat down, yeah, I was exhausted, but I started to think back. I feel like most people would probably have had that experience and just be like, wow, I made it. Cool. Not another thought. But I made this into a whole motivational speech where I sat down and I was like, whoa, I made it. But I swore in my head more than 3 times that my body was going to give out. I'm not going to make this. I wonder how many other times that if I just didn't listen to my head, then my body could have been able to do things. In fact, I wonder how many other times if I just didn't listen to this, then I could have been able to achieve so many other things, you know? And then that, you know, that just became like a whole thing where it's like we limit ourselves a lot of times because our mind may not know what we are actually capable of. Mm-hmm. And that was, in my opinion, an NI moment where like I was able to like observe my thoughts and how my thoughts, my preconceived thoughts of myself influenced me as a person, or like may have inhibited me from future things or from past things and stuff like that. And now ever since then, I've like tried to be more cognizant of that in my metacognition. Like, wait, can I really not do that? Or is this just my mind trying to tell me that I can't do that because this is what it believes? But in actuality, I am definitely like capable. So yeah, in my closing thought with that, I guess like, you know, whether you're an NI user or not, when you're dealing with NI users, hopefully you can like keep this in mind. Like, this is kind of how we think. This is not kind of, this is how we think. Some more conscious of it than others. But regardless, it's our main perceiving process that we use. And sometimes it might seem invasive. Sometimes it might seem like, especially with the ENJs, a little bit like controlling, you know, and this is why a lot of people are like, what are you doing to me kind of thing. But like, look at the intentions and try to trust, you know, try to understand if you can trust the person, because most times I venture to believe they're actually trying to help you out. And the only way they can prove, it's so hard to describe that process of planting seed. Just like I said, like with Dave, like I wouldn't have been able to get you to eat from that fruit and stuff unless if I was able to, or get you to even trust me on this, unless if I was able to just do it. You know, it's really hard to tell you, like, that's why I think a lot of like times like NI users, they don't explain their plan because it's like, oh, you won't understand it. Let me just do it. And then you'll see, and then you'll trust my plan in the future. Because I see things, but I don't know how to explain how I see it. You're going to ask all these questions. You're going to doubt. Let me just do it. And then you'll be like, whoa. And you'll probably be upset with how I went about it, maybe because it was invasive seeming or whatever, mainly for ENJs. But you won't be able to deny that it ended up working out for your good. And hopefully we'll arrive at a point where you will trust me more. And then I won't have to be as quote unquote sneaky about it. Yeah. I think that's like how I see it. Like, yeah.
So yeah, Denzel, those are amazing thoughts. I think that you thinking back on that event and how your cognition of that event affected the actual outcome of the event was very NI, because I do that a lot too. And I go like, what are the preconceived notions that people held or hold that cause them to react and act a certain way? And these preconceived notions are completely in our control. And can we take these things in our control and create a better fate? At least that's how I use my NI. Yeah, so I relate. Also, Grace, you mentioned this idea about Pandora's box and NI, and I thought maybe you could go a little bit into that because it was really cool.
Yeah, so by the way, those are some like awesome thoughts, Denzel. Totally agree. That great closing thoughts too on that. When I first heard the story of Pandora's box, I'm like, yeah, of course. You know, like that like myth or whatever of Pandora's box, of needing to uncover the secrets of the universe and just being like so curious that like no matter what it is you want to know, even if it creates like a ripple effect of sort of pain, at least you know the truth, and at least you are informed on reality and you're acting in accordance with the real thing, you know. So I definitely, in my life, as a kid, like probably one of the first things I had like one of these deep like wonderings about was, I'm also Christian. I do believe in Jesus. And as a kid though, like I did have faith, but I didn't understand everything fully. And so I was kind of confused on certain things. Like, my teachers would be saying, like my teachers, in Sunday school would be saying like, yeah, well, Jesus had to die on the cross, like, duh. And I'm like, yeah, like, I believe it. I believe that that's how, like, we're saved. But I still don't get why. Why did he have to die? Why couldn't God just snap his fingers and say, you're forgiven. The world is saved. I was like, why does that have to happen? I don't understand. Like, and they're like, well, because it had to, because you can't forgive things without the shedding of blood. And I'm like, what? But you're not telling me why. You're just giving me a phrase. Like, I can't retrace what you're saying in my mind. There was nothing to trace. And I was a kid. I was like 8 years old. I didn't know yet. But I did know that one day I would figure it out, or not figure it out, but like it would become very clear. Because like these things, like these spiritual things to me, like when I got saved, I was in preschool. I knew nothing. But all of a sudden it's like, boom, this is the reality. Like, you need to trust God. I'm like, oh my word, I do. This is so true. And maybe that's also kind of, an aspect of faith. But I think like maybe God used my NI to speak that, like the truths to me that way, and so many truths have sort of felt like, well, boom, duh. But then the more I learn, like it can be confusing and something to like sift and unravel. And so when I was maybe 12 or 13, I really began to understand the concept of justice, and that like, like in order for justice to be like, justice is such a fundamental concept because like, right and wrong and all these kind of moral implications of things. And I'm like, justice, that's why Jesus had to, because you can't just like create like a bunch of like good without sacrifice. You can't like reconcile evil just with the snap of a finger. You can't just do that. And so like, that's why Jesus had to die, because you cannot trade a burden of evil and sin in the world for like righteousness and truth, unless like Jesus dies to actually make that transference possible. And there's this sacrifice, and somebody needed to suffer our punishment for us to get like the righteousness that Jesus has. And I know that like definitely not everyone is going to believe in that, and that's totally cool. But to me, that's just, what I believe. And to me, it finally made sense when I came to this realization about justice. And then at that point, like that summer from then on out, I'm like, how much about the Bible that I've just assumed do I need to really look into? And all of a sudden, like that whole summer, I was just like listening to podcasts and like trying to know everything. And I realized that there was this part of my mind that was very questioning and pondering. And I noticed that was the more I looked into those things, the more that background process of, retracing my thought patterns like became so all consuming. And I'd always had it, like all that process was always there, but it was, as a child, before I had something to really like hone in and target on, it was kind of random. It would be like, as a kid, I'd think like, wow. So that I look like at a picture of myself as a baby, be like, whoa, I was a different human being then. I've changed. I'm going to be a different human being in the future. Interesting. And then I would just like kind of like, as a kid, you don't like know how to hone in and pursue understanding and unraveling of a pattern more. But it's really cool. I think I've talked to some other NJs about this, and they're like, yeah, I hate being a kid because like your brain isn't at the level that you're like, and I wanted it to be at yet. So once you get older and you get the capability to pursue that NI that's just sort of been begging for attention or begging for you to seek understanding, it's really cool because the more you pursue it, like you can almost train that process to really hone in on one idea. And the clarity that you've been searching for your whole life, if you give it the attention that it is being asked for, you can actually start to gain a lot of that clarity. So that's one of the blessings and curses of NI, is both the intensity of like not knowing and being frustrated at a lack of clarity and a lack of understanding, and like, man, there's an answer, but I don't know it. But then that clarity can be pretty satisfying too.
Yeah, so NI kind of wants to close the loops. If it has something that's not completely understood, it wants to like close that loop and like really, really understand it. And yeah, so that leads us off on our last note. And so thank you so much, Denzel and Grace, for being such like great guests. You guys gave a lot of NI wisdom nuggets, and I'm really thankful to have you guys on. It was really great to hear about the seeds from you, Denzel, and to hear about Grace and how she talked about the concept of Adler and relating it back to psychology. So that was cool. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for just, being my friends and being like cool people to talk to, and also just being great content producers too. So link below is Denzel's channel. He also does videos with Heidi Puri, which is like an ENFP book author, and they talk about like the functions and stuff through a live stream. And yeah, thank you for enriching us today, you both. And thank you, viewers, for making it through this far. You guys are really great. And I'm so thankful that you like the show enough to watch this far. Like, it means the world to me. Like, it's just a humble little show to me. But if you watch this far, it really shows that, you care about it. And, I'm very touched by that. So I hope y'all have a great one. Stay safe, and bye, y'all.